Yes,
Okay, recording started. Hello, everybody. This is the usual weekly Gateway API meeting. Today is June 18th. And please remember this is a meeting regulated by the CNCF Code of Conduct. So please be nice to each other. And if you want, you can start you can start writing your names in the document, link it here. And yeah, I guess we can start with the first item in the list, which is from you, Lior.
Yeah, just one more shout out. RC14V030.030 is out. There are some nice features. I set it on the Slack. And yeah, if people wanna try it, it will be useful for us. Yeah, that's the first item.
Yeah, I guess I see two highlights related to the addition of new providers, which are the addition of OpenAPI, thanks to Guillermo, and the addition of GGC provider. So yeah, these are cool stuff. The number of providers is increasing over time.
yeah, this is really awesome to see. Thank you, Lior, for leading this and everyone. I know there's a lot of contributors out here. Guy and David did the GCE one, and I see there's so many others too. So yeah, thank you. I'm looking forward to trying it out.
Yeah. And the second one is from you as well, Lior.
Yeah, yeah. So it's more of like for people who are not who weren't part of the discussion about supported feature structure. So yeah, please feel free to go to this issue and leave your opinion. Currently, I just listed two options, which are none of them are my idea, by the way. It's just like things that came up from other people in the community. So yeah, feel free to add more ideas. I know that essentially translating this to a GitHub issue just literally means that we're probably not going to hit the 1.2 because if we're making the change, we'll need more soak time. But yeah, if we want to do it correctly, so yeah, just put your idea, and ideally we can get consensus and get this going. And I saw there's a comment from Shane, which didn't follow up on, but yeah, so currently it's implemented in Istio and in Envoy proxy. I feel like to answer this question here, I feel like it's more of like an implementer feedback other than users feedback. I didn't get any user feedback, and I didn't see any issue open on those repos, but I might be missing something. So I'll try to follow up on.
I was just curious.
No, that's a good question, of course.
Yeah, because one of the things that's not clear to me is like, not to say that we shouldn't do this, but at least the question has come up for me, like, why are we doing this exactly? Like the whole thing, the whole feature. Like I get why we're doing it for me, kind of personally, but given that we're kind of in uncertainty, it would be good to know what a user thinks of it. It'd be great if we could get that feedback.
Yeah, on that note, I think one of the biggest questions I have is, are we doing this exclusively for some kind of automation to parse this, such as Gateway Cuddle or any dashboard or whatever to surface warnings? Or are we doing this for users, customers to look directly at Gateway class status and understand, discover themselves? So far, I've been working with the idea that it's both, but if we find out that users really don't care about being able to manually read this, then that changes.
Yeah,
I feel like
that would influence our decisions a little bit, I think.
I feel like the way I came up, so the way I kind of, I think, put it in the gap, and like my idea is like the machine readable option like, not machine readable, but like for the automation or for gateway cuddle, CLIs, whatever, I think it's the first priority. And ultimately it's gonna, improve the user experience because the user will be able to use it. But I think there's also the fact for users, all right, like, I'm in the cluster, I'm debugging something, I want to know what features are supported. There was another piece of good feedback was back then that we want to know that what the feature are supported per version of the controller or version of the gateway. So I don't need to just go out to the gateway API documentation and can just kubectl get gateway class and understand this. But I don't anticipate that people would just, what's this feature? So I'm gonna kubectl get gateway class and just click on the URL to do it. I mean, it might be convenient, but I don't think it's the point of Kubernetes. And I said it somewhere in Slack. But yeah, I feel like it's gonna give some better user experience for people who just need a small answer. All right, is my gateway class even support this, or and some other things we can add? But I don't feel like it's gonna be instead of documentation.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of a user, and I think it could be very beneficial for debugging purpose. I mean, if you have something that isn't working properly in your cluster, you may want just to double check that the feature that you are looking for is actually supported by the implementation. But I mean, I think that the check should be performed upfront by the user, right? So if I want to pick an implementation, I won't wait to deploy a gateway class and an implementation and check the gateway class status to understand if a feature is supported by the implementation. So I see it like a useful feature for debugging purpose, more than just documentation-oriented stuff. I don't know.
Yeah, one of my things is if we are saying this is exclusively for debugging, I am, or for machine readable, automation, I am very curious if a flat list is fine, right? Like if what's going to happen is, get gateway class OYAML grep, feature name, then does it really matter? But if it's something like where we're really trying to build discoverability, and I guess the whole idea of a gateway class is you look at the gateway class and you understand what's available in your cluster without having to leave your cluster. I don't know.
So why wouldn't we start with the list of maps with just like naming it? Then we can actually graduate it, and it is extensible, right? Like Dave suggested. And then if we want to come up with tiered, like, or whatever extension we want, so we could add more keys to the map. But I mean, theoretically, if we start with a map when just like name keys, like list of maps with name keys, it will be almost identical to a list, but just have this extension, and then we'll be able to get the feedback from users if we're not not sure about
Yeah, I think the idea of a list of maps is pretty flexible and nice in that sense, but even that is, I think, a breaking it. Well, yeah, it's a big enough API change that we probably can't graduate in this release either. So because right now it's just a list of strings.
Yeah, so that's the reason I don't think, like, if we are going to make any change, so we're not going to graduate anything. So like this release. So I feel like I gave up the idea of graduating this release because of the soak time.
Yeah.
Mike?
Yeah, so my question about this was like, is it literally just a list of maps that are unstructured, or is it like a list of structs or something like that? Like, if the primary intent of this is to be machine readable, like, how much do we need to care about like the actual structure of these objects in the list at this point? And like, do we want allowances for nesting things within them, like the categories in the proposal there?
So I think, so currently, to be clear, I mean, if to put everyone on the same page, currently it's a list of strings, right? So it's not extensible. And we don't know, because I feel like we didn't get this feedback from users, more from implementers. So we don't know where this will go. So I put my own opinions on how I would use it, and others have their own opinion, but I feel like if we put just a list of map, like I think an unstructured map, like, a string key and, some value. Not sure if we need to put the values like defined as string or like, something that can be nested. We can elaborate on that, but then it leaves future future extension opportunities, which obviously we're going to need to use once we get the feedback, I feel. Does that answer the question?
Kind of, yeah. I guess I'm still just fuzzy on like if we have just a list of like unstructured maps, then like is that a concern for machine readability or like I get that like you can start adding new keys to them, but I know that there's been concern about that in other places in this API before, like the TLS options or something like that, in terms of like just adding conventions for things versus actually having it part of the data type.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do you have other ideas?
I don't have a strong preference or opinion on this, honestly. It was really just like, what's the thing? Like, if we graduate a list of maps, then are we like further refining it or like adding expected key value pairs to it at some point in the future? Like, is that breaking? Is it not? Like, yeah, this is just me trying to like understand this better of like the path to
What
promotion.
what we did in I don't want to say this is a great example, but we do have a little bit of prior art here. I would say this would be similar in scope to when we changed the conditions that we required to be set. And so if
Yeah.
you're not changing the actual API structure, but you're changing how you expect it to be populated, that's an interesting change. And what some implementations, for example, GK did for some period of time afterwards is they populated the new conditions and the old conditions, and will eventually stop populating the old conditions. Um, I don't know that we want to rely on that pattern too much because it's awfully painful, especially if you have, a list of 50 features and you're populating it two different ways. That gets awful. But it is at least technically possible, I would say. So if we really are stuck and really don't like how it ends up turning out, we do have a theoretical way out.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't we come up with a structure and then, in the structure, we're going to have a name, right? Like, let's say, this would be the supported feature would be a supported feature structure and it would have a name in it. And, it, it being not a map, it's still extensible if we want to add fields to this specific structure. However, if we ended up saying, we need a tiered version that we cannot support right now, we need something else, then we'll go through the process of coming up with a new field and deprecate it, which is annoying, but I just don't have any other ideas.
Yeah, and I think the thing that it seems like we're all agreeing on is we should start with a structure, a list of structs, basically. And then ideally, we try to come up with a set of names that we think are likely to succeed long term or likely to be reasonable or, but understand that if we do get it wrong, we do have some flexibility to make changes, and the struct gives us that flexibility by adding fields or saying that we expect different values to be populated here, etc. But obviously we should do our best to aim for success the first time. But yeah, so I think the list of structs is the starting point, and then maybe we can do some brainstorming. I don't know, spreadsheet doc, wherever it makes sense of like where things fall, what we call them, and hope that scales.
And like for the list of structs thing, like if we were to make a breaking change at some point in the future, like say removing a field, is that would that would it be possible to do the GKE strategy that you're talking about of like populating the old version and populating the new version if like the struct changes? 'Cause I don't think it would unless we went through a painful thing of like this field is deprecated, but it's still on the actual struct.
Yeah, it's one of those things where the actual structure of the API can't really change, but how you populate it can. So and ideally you'd have no overlap in the terms, like so
Yeah.
if you have, struct named foo, the next thing you want to be populated is foo2 or something like that. I don't know, right? So that you can theoretically populate both old and new going forward. But I would prefer not to rely on that, but at least it does leave us an out if we really do get this wrong.
I feel like it should requires more follow up as well offline.
Yeah.
Yeah. So maybe we could
Great.
continue.
Cool. Yeah, I have no strong opinions in terms of the semantics, or I'm more just thinking of like, do we have an out for breaking changes and like what are the implications of the decisions we make now? That's all.
No, that's definitely good feedback. That's what we need. So I appreciate you bringing this up.
Okay, I guess there will be a follow-up on Slack or GitHub or somewhere else, right? Rob, the next one is from you.
Yeah, I just wanted to give an update on so our release scoping phase ended on Tuesday of last week, so that was basically a week ago today. The thank you to everybody that has volunteered to take things across the line to standard. Maybe we can run through the list real quick. We don't have that many people on the call today, but timeouts and duration, I know Flynn can't make it to this one. Supported features, we just talked about that one. Thank you, Lior. Candace, I don't think Candace is on today's call. But back in TLS policy, I know that we really need conformance tests on that one. Back-end protocol selection, that one is good. I think almost everything's already merged. So thanks, Dave. TLS route, Mattia, I don't know if you have any updates. I saw you were working on some issues.
Yeah, I've been creating some issues, an epic issue to gather all the TLS route already existing issues. And yeah, I think I'm shepherding all the issues right now, and yeah, I'm trying to move it forward.
Cool. And I don't see Keith, but I know he'd mentioned Mike and Whitney. I don't know if any of you have any updates on what's happening with in-cluster gateway config, but yes, and that's the last one.
If you want to respond, but I'm around too.
Sorry, what?
Oh, I was saying that I think Whitney's on the call. But yeah, if you want to take it first, but I'm around too if there's anything you want me to fill in.
You can go ahead, Mike.
All right. Yeah, so we think that we have an idea of how to approach actually writing conformance tests for the labels and annotations. It's just so I looked at Dave's prior attempt at this, and I think what the gap was is that doing this is basically it would be dependent on a label for like generated resources specified in the gap, but which I don't think many people have actually implemented. So what you would do is basically you check the like write spec .infra annotations, and then you look for resources with the label matching the like generated from this gateway, and then see if it has those. Is I think the approach that you would take for that. I just don't know if anybody's actually implemented that generated resources label.
Very interesting. What would you do if there were no generated resources? Is that like, is the test just that if there are generated resources, they have this label. Okay.
Exactly. It's possible that no resources are generated, or if it's creating out of cluster things, then it's like not applicable. And I think that's fine if like nothing is found, then you would like skip or let's not report it or something like that. But I don't think you would fail it.
Yeah,
I
it's
think
like, go ahead.
yes. No, sorry, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've wanted to leave room for. I don't want to commit that GK would do this, but we could theoretically, take this and map it to cloud resource labels, basically like labeling the underlying LBs that we're creating, matching these patterns. And so I'd want to make sure that we had a path to, if not passing, at least not failing conformance tests if we did that. But I know the other side too is you end up in a case where if you're not careful, somebody doing absolutely nothing would pass conformance tests, right? And that, was one of the things we struggle with Dave's PR of basically the way to fail it would be to actually actively do something. But if you didn't, you could claim conformance. And I don't know how to solve that, but it sounds like you're on a good track right now.
I mean, it could also be that like if you set that when you're running the conformance test and you indicate that you support this feature, like you're opting into it, and maybe there's an expectation that you're generating resources if you support that feature, and you don't have like, well, the thing that we're not promoting yet, but like or not doing yet, like the static gateway info or something like that.
Yeah. Yep.
I think there's a way to
Okay.
make it work though. So
Yeah,
that's
makes
the
sense.
encouraging news on that one. And yeah, Whitney and Keith are probably going to take the lead on implementing that while I work on retries.
Awesome. Thanks. Oh, I guess the rest is mine too. So, so next up, on the new to experimental front, there's this discussion that we've gone through, and we locked this discussion just so that we could not to avoid comments or anything. We just wanted to lock the votes in place so that, we saw what we were looking at the time when the scoping phase ended. And then we came up with a hopefully reasonably fair weighting mechanism. If you look at that spreadsheet right below, yeah. So this was basically the heaviest weight was the community interest, then this idea of table stakes. These are the scores from the meeting we had the week before, then portability, complexity budget, and review complexity. And you'll notice that by and large, the most popular, most widely requested features made it in. There was a tie where one of the most heavily requested was merging gateways, tied with one of the less requested ones. And they were on very opposite ends of the spectrum. Merging gateways was seen as very, very complicated, but also very desired. And request mirroring, percentage-based request mirroring was very much not complicated and less desired. And so they ended up tying based on this weighting. So we let them both through, and hopefully we can get these in. But anyway, this is just trying to be transparent of how we landed with which gaps made it through. I do want to thank everyone who proposed something for 1.2. And I really hope that we can find room for some of these proposals that missed 1.2 in the following release, 1.3. So definitely don't give up. Just it's just a not now. So hopefully the next release will have some more capacity for these things. First up is named route rules. Guillaume, I think that's basically done or about to be done. I think you have an open PR for this. Is that correct?
Yeah, we have the PR for the gap that was merged, even though it says provisional. So I'm just sending now to move it to implementable. But the PR that I imagine you refer to is the one by John Howard doing the actual implementation of that in Dave. So that is still pending and needs review.
Okay, great. And then gateway merging, Dave, I think you're on the call. This one is the one I am far and away the most nervous about because it's so potentially complex. I don't know I'm assuming, is this waiting on another round of review at this point? Is there anything I can be doing to help on this one?
Yeah, I think reviewing would be useful. I think you had some comments. I think the gist of it was this complexity. I don't think Nick's done a review yet, so I don't know if getting him to review it would make sense before I do more edits. I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, I'll chat with Nick to see if he can take a look too. I would say this is, if there are some people on this call, I think that were around it when the idea of route delegation was pushed forward back in the day, and that was basically adding a layer of hierarchy at the route layer, an additional layer, and that was more complex than it seemed. And I feel like this one, gateway merging, is also more complex. And I feel like if we're adding an additional layer at the gateway level, we may effectively be ruling out adding that additional layer at the routing layer. Like I feel like it would be very difficult to have route delegation and what is effectively gateway delegation here. So I think we just need to make sure as we're reviewing this that we have those kind of like bigger picture I don't know, ideas about what we see the future of this being. Yeah, I will try and take another look this week as well. Thank you for driving this one. I know it's gotten stuck, and yeah, I will try and take another look. Retries, this is Mike. Thank you, Mike, for volunteering for this one. Any status updates on this one?
No, mostly that I'll be on vacation next week, so it's more likely that I'll be doing this the like first and second week of July.
Okay.
We know what needs to happen first is professional work and do a survey of existing proxies. So yeah, I'll probably be doing that second week of July. So
and
later than the requested deadline, but should be a bunch.
I think that's all right for this. I think if I heard correctly, this one may start with just the kind of max count retries, and budgeted retries may be a follow-up later. Is that
the budgeted retries?
awesome?
I will at least have a plan for it.
Yeah.
Even if it's not available initially, but it's going to need to be part of it before we promote anything.
Okay. That's fair. And then the next one, that's me back in MTLS. This is a broad set of things, but something that I'd propose to lead. I'm hoping to have something available certainly by the end of this month, hopefully sooner, because this is a big topic. And yeah. And then the other one, timeouts. I don't think Arco's on this call, but this one just kind of snuck. Oh, Arco, you are here. But this one snuck in and got a lot of interest in the last week. Arco, do you have any updates on this one?
No updates yet, but yeah, I'll
Okay.
try to wrap it up by the deadline. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Thanks. And then the last one is the percentage-based request mirroring. That's Jake. He's somebody who actually works at Google, so I'll check in with him async. And yeah, I think that's all. So yeah, this is our first time doing things this way. I just want to highlight, there's going to be a huge backlog of for reviews. So the earlier you can get your GEP in, the greater chance it will succeed. So I would say if we can aim to have GEPs ready for review by end of June, that would be great. And then we've said that the end of this phase is July 30. So if a GEP is not merged as implementable by July 30, it will be dropped from a release. And unfortunately, I think a big part of that may just be let's say you have a PR that you think is ready on July 29 or something, but then, there's some back and forth on review and we miss it. That's, unfortunately possible. It happens in upstream Kubernetes here and there. So I would, yeah, I just please, earlier the PR, the better it is. And I really want to make sure we can get as many of these in as possible. Yeah, I think that's everything I had for the 1.2. Thank you everyone for working with us with this new system. Don't hesitate to give any feedback at all on this release process. This is an entirely new thing, so if anything feels a little bit off, wrong, whatever, don't hesitate to drop something like in Slack or whatever. We are very open to ways to improve this process. Yeah. And yes, I just saw Mike's comment in chat, and I agree that back in MTLS, anything with TLS in the name of a gap is going to be complicated. So trying to get that one out early for review so that we can hopefully get this one to sneak in. But yeah, we'll see.
Okay. I actually, since we have no more points to the list, I actually have something related to the TLS route. There is an issue related to the gap of the TLS route, and basically there's a discussion ongoing about the need of a gap for an API which is old enough to not have a gap, right? And Candida proposed to not to use a gap for TLS route. I agree with what she said, and basically, yeah, I wanted to gather feedback about this, about the need of having a TLS route gap, which in my opinion doesn't make too much sense because it becomes kind of a book on what has already been wrote and created. So yeah.
I think, yeah, I hate to say the unpopular thing here, but I think I would prefer to see some kind of very lightweight gap here. And a very specific question I'd like to see answered in that gap is why we chose to have both TLS and TCP route, basically. Like, because I've gotten a fair amount of feedback. Well, couldn't you just do pass through over TCP, for example, right? And so I think answering that question as we choose to graduate this is important. And I think the best way to answer that specific question is in a gap, though I would agree we don't need to rehash, everything. We don't need to have an exhaustive, long-winded gap, but just the questions of why this specific route exists, I think are most important.
These are questions I had like coming to this project new like 2 years ago that had already been settled at that point. So yeah, I think it's just like explaining an alternative considered section based on decisions that were made like 3 years ago.
Posterity. It's purely posterity. I know it's a pain, but I agree.
Yeah, it is.
I think we should just do it just for posterity, if nothing else, so nobody can say we didn't do it, right? Like, nobody can say like, "Hey, I want my thing to get through without a gap. I saw TLS route did it." No, nothing like that.
Yeah. Okay.
I have a question about that. So was about the motivation of TLS route? Was it so that you could have a wildcard listener hostname and then you could do SNI routing at another layer?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's basically the only value that TLS route provides over TCP route. So we just have to be clear that's something that we want. And, because, every route type provides some additional complexity. So is that something we want? Are there additional features that we expect TLS route to need in the future, such as are we going to add additional TLS configuration to TLS route that something like TCP route would never have? I would say those are kind of the big open questions. But yeah, I think that was the big selling point back in the day for TLS route. We'll match the pattern that people have gotten accustomed to with HTTP route, but for TLS. Whether or not that was a good decision is probably worth revisiting before we graduate to GA.
But can't you? But you still can redirect traffic like encrypted traffic over HTTP route, right? And gRPC route.
Yes. I think what we're saying, like a TLS route, in my opinion, exists almost exclusively for TLS termination, and sorry, TLS pass through. But you could there's been another open discussion about TLS termination with TLS route, where you terminate and then re-encrypt.
Yeah.
And use SNI for routing there. So I think these are kind of the questions. Yes, this very good feature request. These are questions worth discussing in a gap, right? So I don't, I wouldn't say reopen old things, but just, we have these kind of open questions that I think you've already listed as what we need to resolve before we graduate. So I think just capturing all of those and answering them in a gap is useful.
Okay.
Did you actually did this conversation though, like whether to support it in HTTP route or gRPC route, like back then?
Oh no. So I mean, the reason not to do HTTP route is like if you add HTTP routing rules, then they're just not going to be useful or valid when you're doing TLS pass through, right? Because you don't have any visibility into HTTP.
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, but it could be an op. Oh, I see. So like, I see. So if you're doing pass through, you wouldn't. I see. So that's the only reason where someone would go and choose TLS route.
Yeah, so far though then there's this feature request that kind of threw a wrench in things of somebody who actually wanted to terminate and then I think re-encrypt, if I remember the specific request correctly, and do routing exclusively with SNI, which is not one that we thought of originally. And it's like, yeah, this is technically possible. It just kind of messes with our, simple, TLS route is for pass through and HTTP route is for terminate. And then, oh, well, what about this? So yeah, these are the fun questions that I think we should have an answer to in a gap. They may not be perfect, but it just when they inevitably come up again, just having a place to point people to instead of rely on this kind of like common knowledge of 2 years ago, I think we decided this because of, for the few people that were around then.
Okay. So basically, it can be just an overview of the API, the whys, and the open questions that are still not addressed. And yeah, basically the root reason to have a proper TLS route. Okay, sounds good to me.
Thanks.
Oh yeah, thank you for adding a new item. Is there anything else you want to discuss? Okay, so I guess we can wrap it up. Thank you all for your attendance and see you next time.
Cheers.
Great, thanks.